So today we have a conversation on philosophy of martial arts.
Sure.
My first question would be about principles. Like, what principles do philosophy and martial arts have in common?
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, one could almost say that martial arts is sort of a philosophical pursuit, but through more physical means. But if we're going to talk about philosophy as the love of knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge and greater understanding, in some ways martial arts is the same way. It's a love of knowledge, of kind of understanding how your body functions, how to obviously there's a martial aspect, so obviously how to defeat opponents and things like that, but that's a lot of that's gained through knowledge. One of the things people don't realize is the term kung fu doesn't specifically mean martial arts. Kung fu just kind of means being a master of any sort of skill or knowledge. So it's kind of been applied a lot in the Chinese culture to the use of martial arts, but it does have other implications. And you could say, someone, who's very good, let's say someone who's a very good chef is a kung fu chef, because he has a mastery of that. So, but you can say martial arts, and specifically as we think of it, really in terms is a pursuit of knowledge too, and a pursuit of skill and technique through primarily physical means. And just the same as philosophy is a pursuit of knowledge and intellectual understanding.
You've been practicing judo for more than 30 years. There are some, I've just read an article on Wikipedia about judo. There's two basic principles. One is maximum efficient use of energy, and the other mutual welfare and benefit.
Yes, correct. Those are the two main principles that was founded by Dr. Kano Jigoro, who founded judo, and he's ironically also the father of the modern education system in Japan too. So that's really what his doctorate is in. Yes, what he did was judo, for those who don't know, is descended from jujitsu, and it's not the jujitsu that most people think of these days, which is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which actually is descended from judo. But originally jujitsu was the unarmed combat techniques that would be employed by the samurai. So in case you lost your sword in battle, how would you fight? That's why there's less emphasis on striking techniques, although there are striking techniques, but more emphasis on throwing and joint locking and things like that, because obviously you wouldn't want to just kick somebody in armor, but if you threw them or put them on the ground, you attack the joints, particularly Japanese armor, then you could gain advantage. So that's kind of the evolution of what was originally Japanese jiu-jitsu. And Kano, who founded judo, he was a master of jiu-jitsu, and he wanted to bring it into the modern age, and he wanted to create a system that could both be used to transmit certain values, used for educational purposes, and also become a sport. Whereas jiu-jitsu at that point, there were competitions in it, but it was not a formalized sport. It wasn't even what we'd think of today as MMA. It was more almost kind of duels in the sense. So he wanted to make it safer and more sport-like, and that's evolved into what is the modern Olympic sport that we know as judo. But he did put down some principles, and the principles, again, maximum efficiency for minimum effort is the idea of kind of very simplified of sort of using your opponent's strength against them, or using their force against them. And also the idea of mutual benefit and welfare was the understanding that this is not what we're doing. Yes, it's a martial art, but what it's really about is about improving ourselves. And through practice of judo is how you not only improve yourself, but improve others, and you basically help others, work with it. Just like the background I'm showing here is the Kodokan in Japan, kind of the heart of judo. It was the original dojo that was founded by Dr. Kano. And as you can see, all the people down there training, the whole idea of the training is we're not just about making ourselves, the best and the guy who kicked the most ass, but it's also about how do we improve people, how do we develop people. So that's what that second tenet is: mutual benefit and welfare.
Mhm. What do you think? What kind of virtues it teaches us, like practicing martial arts, specifically practicing judo?
There are a lot of virtues. Obviously, those ideas of one, learning to use other strength. I mean, not necessarily against them, but actually just kind of to your advantage. So the kind of story behind Kano was that he was he was a small and sickly child,
Mhm.
and his family got him into martial arts because they thought it'd be something that would be good to improve his health. So has a system of kind of techniques, was this idea of not just relying purely upon strength, but learning kind of an understanding of how does that strength work? How do you apply it properly? How do you counter strength? So in many ways, you can take that that idea just out of not just within martial arts, but you can take certainly these ideas to many other fields. And certainly if we talk about philosophical debate or things like that, it is partly, you can understand, what are the strengths of an argument? How do we, if we're having a, debate, how do we use that for our advantage? Or how do we, if we believe that someone's, making an argument that we don't think is correct, how do we understand the weaknesses of that to turn that back? So that's one way of looking at it. There's a lot of kind of martial arts philosophy is not, maybe less so from Dr. Kano, but more from like Sun Tzu or Musashi, have been applied to politics and business. Very much the same idea of kind of understanding your strengths and your weaknesses and how do you use that to your advantage. So those are certainly, but obviously the mutual benefit and welfare, though, is definitely one that is something that applies really to all fields. About how do we find ways of not just saying it's about ultimately defeating somebody, but maybe it's about, we find both ways, mutual ways we can succeed. And it's kind of an odd thing coming from a art that is a sport, that there are winners, there are losers, and there is a hierarchical system behind it. But part of one of the sayings and I don't think it's necessarily specific to judo, but I think it's general martial arts, is that when you win, you should thank your opponent for bringing out the best in you. When you lose, you should thank your opponent for showing you your weaknesses and your technique and where you need to improve. So that's again that idea of mutual benefit and welfare.
So there's kind of nobility here, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
There's a kind of nobility here in treating your opponent, not like in the UFC when they before starting the fight they just attack each other verbally, and
Yes,
there's some mutual respect, even though you
yes.
will. Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is a lot of mutual respect, and I guess you could term that as nobility in that you should always respect your opponent. You should always, whether you win or lose, you should always respect your opponent. It is both, again, just because it's good to be respectful and in general, but it's also because you should never take your opponent or for granted, because you don't know, again, martial arts, you learn, you train, but there's always things can happen. You never know what can happen, so you always want to be prepared.
Mm-hmm. Did you have in your experience when you, for example, was in a fight with somebody and you like either hated your opponent or showed more aggression and like emotions which in judo should be controlled ideally?
Oh yeah, certainly it's hard to control your emotions, and certainly I've certainly had plenty of times where my emotions have gotten the best of me.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, yeah, and there's certainly times when you do lose control, and that's not a good thing, especially when we're doing something like this. That's so dangerous. There's certainly times you get the emotions, when you get beaten, you don't necessarily feel good. Sometimes it's hard to just kind of give that respect to your opponent when you feel like like you've been beaten and you feel like you should have been the one to win. So that's always hard to do. So
Mhm.
it is important.
Do you have some special psychological techniques how to, you know, feel better in such situations?
Um, there are, I guess, when you talk about psychology, I mean, so much of what we do in martial arts is really mental, and you can train. Most people can, it's good to be an athlete. Certainly, that helps to have better physical ability. But you can, I tend to believe that most people can be trained to get up to a pretty decent level of physical conditioning, and if you do a lot of the kind of exercises and things, you can certainly build up, but when you get to, especially when you get to higher levels, it is, everybody there is going to be in good physical shape. And so you have to rely upon what are your mental edges, what are your tactical edges there. And it's when you talk about the psychology of it, it's incredibly in a judo match and really any martial arts match, boxing, wrestling, and I will include those in martial arts. It's an incredibly stressful situation if you're not prepared for it. It can be overwhelming. I mean, you have literally, we're operating under, a match is not a true fight. We're operating under rules and certain conditions. But that said, this is, someone's trying to defeat you, someone's trying to hurt you. There is the intense possibility of getting injured, getting, and that can be very stressful. So you need to, there's a lot of things that go into it. Some talk about there is a certain amount of calmness. If you can achieve a certain mental calmness to your approach, you can do better. There's also, though, the sense of if you can master your emotions and kind of use that emotion to your advantage about that. So I'm not going to say everybody's the same. So you need to kind of find what kind of works for you.
Mhm.
I can tell you, for me, as I've evolved as a martial artist, when I started out, I would exhaust myself. I would literally, the build up to the match, I would have so much anticipation, just feel so much energy. I would just exhaust myself just being that. And I had problems where a lot of times if I had a match that went on for a while, I would lose because I would literally just burn up. I would just use up so much, even before I got into the match. I would just be so amped, and then I started to figure out how to get calm, and I got to a point where I got maybe too calm
Mhm.
and started kind of feeling like, well, I don't really have an edge here. I'm not really approaching this. So you need to find that kind of middle ground where you need to get to. You need to, use a sports term. You need to be amped up enough, but you can't be too amped. So
But what exactly
it's,
do you
it's
like? Kind of to tell yourself, or this is something that I am prepared for. This is something that I have experienced, and like how do you calm yourself? How you?
it's difficult because there was a lot of times, especially early on, where you'd feel like when you're getting out to the mat and you're ready, you almost feel like you're almost out of control. It's the situation could get beyond you,
Mhm.
and that's kind of hard to describe. But you go up, you step up, you bow, and it's like your kind of your mind is going like, well, what are you going to do? What on here? And you need to kind of mentally take control of the situation to just say, okay, I'm here. This is what I'm doing.
Mhm.
I'm you center yourself into, you're in the moment, to kind of use some more sports cliches, but there's no real way of describing it. Is you have your complete awareness that you're there in that moment, and that's how you kind of mentally take control of the situation. And in terms of kind of getting yourself like psyched up, is I will honestly, I will hit myself a few times. And so when I'm waiting, getting ready to go in, I will just kind of go hit myself like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And that's just kind of a just, it just kind of gets you focused. It kind of centers and gets your, you want to get that right level of adrenaline, but you don't want to be too adrenaline. But as I said, when I was younger, when I was starting out, I would get too worked up. And then I was starting to get maybe not worked up enough. So
How
those
much
are,
time? How much time does it take to to get better? How much experience? How many fights do you have before you really learn to you know to get used to it?
it's different for most people, but certainly for I would say to be any sort of serious competitor, it did take a couple of years at least, and
Mhm.
it depends what age you start at or what maturity level you're at. It's difficult, but certainly the more matches you get, the more training, the more you're prepared for the situation. And it's very tough, being a beginner, being thrown out there, and like suddenly, oh wow, what is this? But some people can handle it. Some people just need more of the training. Some people never can handle it. Um,
How old
you know,
were you when you started?
I started doing karate when I was a little bit as a kid, and I was doing a little bit of all karate. So that probably would have been like I think like 9 or 10,
Uh,
and did that a few years. I I kind of stopped for a couple of years, and I had a bad motorcycle accident when I was 17. And so then I started judo. So basically during my junior senior year. And so then I started judo when I got to college. And the funny story is I was going to do karate, but I couldn't fit in my schedule. So judo was the thing available, but I took to it and I loved it, and kept on doing it. So
so it was quite accidental, like that you started
it
judo.
was it was always accidental how I got into judo. Yes, but
Mhm.
I'd been doing karate before for a few years as a child.
Mhm. In martial arts, there are lots of talks about which martial arts is better than others. Like, do you think in philosophy we may have something to compare with this? Some analogy. Like in martial arts, for example, some people say who do boxing, they say box is the best martial arts. Who do grappling or Chinese martial arts, they say this is the best martial arts. Is there something like that in philosophy? This is the best
In
approach.
philosophy, in philosophy, there's certainly, you get five philosophers together, you're gonna have six different arguments. I mean, it's you have your rationalist versus your empiricist and such. There's martial arts there's different schools, just like there's different schools of thought in that, and if you can look at styles of martial arts as different schools of thought, then there's certainly there's differences. Yeah, I mean, if for judo, like judo, taekwondo, karate, BJJ, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because these are sports and they're rule bound sports, wrestling, boxing also, that the rules are based off of a philosophy and kind of an idea behind, how are we going to create a safe environment to compete. And so that's where we kind of develop the rules eventually. But to say, well, can I say that judo is superior
Mhm.
to boxing? Well, it kind of depends. I mean, if we're throwing punches and I'm just going to do judo, well, I've chances are I might get knocked out before I have the chance to get a grip on the person. That said, if I'm in close, can't punch, judo is probably better. If we're on the ground versus if we're standing, maybe wrestling is better than taekwondo. In the end, you have to decide what the goal is. And I'm a judoka in
Mhm.
terms of, as I'm someone who both practices judo and believes in the principles of judo, but I've done, in addition to karate, I cross trained in several different martial arts, including doing a little bit of MMA, um, including having a few bouts too in MMA. So there really just kind of depends, what is the situation. Um,
Yeah,
and there's a
uh,
saying, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go on.
There's a saying in martial arts, it's not the style, it's the fighter. So if you take, fighter A who does judo versus fighter B who does taekwondo, who's going to win? Well, first off, one, depending on the rules, if you're doing judo rules, the judo guy will win, taekwondo rules. But if it's just quote like an MMA fight where they're kind of open, you don't really know. I mean, it's the fighter A who does Taekwondo could just be that much better of an athlete than fighter B who does judo, or
Yeah.
vice versa.
But not in terms of fighting, but in terms of principles. Like, for example, in judo, there are certain principles, and they kind of build your character, right? And we may say that, for example, certain school of thought, they teach you to think about almost everything in a particular way. And in martial arts, there are certain, for example, in boxing, you can't just work on defense, right? You have
Right.
to learn to attack, and there are lots of aggressive martial arts, and those which principles of which are mostly are focused on defense. And can we say that some martial arts in this sense make a person like train them, not better, but when you study a particular fighting techniques, it also makes you like, it's not about just fight with other people, it's about being a person, like about your
Right. Yes.
your lifestyle, how you live, how you treat other people, what you do in life. And some schools of martial arts, they really make you not a good person. They there's so much violence, and there's so much bullying, especially when we're talking about kids. For example, I don't know about judo, but I know lots of bullies who just practice various aggressive, like boxing and kickboxing. And in gym, they all are like a one team, but then they go and do some crazy things around. And
Sure. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. Yes, there's certainly people who get into martial arts because they are bullies, because they want to learn, use techniques they can use to exercise their power on. There's certainly plenty of schools of all styles, including judo. I don't think that are very aggressive in how they teach, very hard, very very strict. And so, yeah, it's hard because I can't speak too much about the philosophical aspects of some of the other martial arts, but from my experience, a lot of the other martial arts do kind of emphasize many, as I was talking about with judo, that this isn't about necessarily about how to win, how to just defeat people. It is about self-improvement, about learning to better understand yourselves and others. For instance, Aikido is translated is the way of the blending force. And so the idea there behind Aikido is very much, you're not trying to stop horses, you're redirecting it. And if you think about that attitude, you can apply that to a lot of other things in life, about how if you don't just resist something just coming head on, but you learn how to redirect it. So that's one philosophy. Obviously Tai Chi is a very philosophical. It's about understanding how your body, how this idea of chi, of force, how you use that in your life. Even karate has that too. So, but that doesn't mean there aren't schools that aren't teaching things. If anybody's seen the TV show, the Netflix show Cobra Kai, I'm a big fan of that, because it's actually very true to life in many ways regarding art schools.
yeah,
But clearly
I've watched it
they illustrate two
recently.
different schools. Yeah. So yeah, there is definitely that there, and there is, and again, there's judo's got some of the same issues too, about what we're teaching, what we're cultivating. In some ways, I think that ultimately comes back to who is the teacher, who is the sensei, and what are the lessons they're passing on to their students.
Can we say that there's some purpose in martial arts, like besides fighting and getting better at self-development? Like some ultimate purpose, like in philosophy, for example, we may say there's a search for truth, right? We want to know the
right.
truth. We want to know
I,
what's real.
there are many martial artists who would argue that the martial arts is about the search for truth too. It's about
Mhm.
it's
Knowing who
about
you
there
are.
is right. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. It's and again, I would go back to Sun Tzu, who's saying that yeah, if you know yourself and know your enemy, you'll never fear the results of 1,000 battles.
Mhm.
It's it is about there. One can argue there's kind of essentially almost an empirical aspect to it. Is that the truth is if you win, your technique is better and your opponent's
Mhm.
technique is less. That can be one empirical truth. It is about, if I improve myself, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally through the disciplines of martial arts, is that the truth that makes me a better person? And ultimately, there is an ultimate test in terms of if we're, put up to the challenge of a martial arts match. But also, how does that improve my, the rest of my life? So that can be argued that yes, that in some ways martial arts is kind of a search for truth in those ways.
What's in your opinion, like why people usually go to do martial arts, to practice martial arts? What?
There's a lot of different reasons. Certainly, the biggest reason probably is usually because um, there's two biggest reasons are usually it's self-defense and wanting to do some type of sport.
Mhm.
So generally for like karate, judo, taekwondo, things like that, especially at the youth level, it's because people they want to get into a sport and they like the aspects of the one-on-one kind of competition of those martial arts. But the other main draw is people want to learn to defend themselves in some way to protect themselves or that. But there are plenty of people who say, well, I want to get involved because I want to get in shape. I know for judo, especially us teaching at the college level, there's a lot of people who are interested in it because they're interested in Japanese culture.
Mhm.
So those seem to be kind of the main reasons why people get involved in it. And
Mhm.
obviously for health reasons too, that people say, yeah, I want to do something that can get me into shape and get me more healthy.
What is the role of a teacher in martial arts? Is it necessary to have a good teacher, or maybe you don't need a teacher at all if you just have this drive and you want to be better at martial arts, especially nowadays when you have all the access to all the information.
Right. Yeah. It's in martial arts going from the beginning of it, it's the role of the teacher, of the sensei in the Japanese arts called the sifu in the
Mhm.
Chinese martial arts has been incredibly important. Um, it's hard to learn because of how technical a lot of this is. It's hard to do this stuff. I mean, you can be a very good athlete, you can have all the raw physical skills, but still not be very good at martial arts. There is so much technique involved, and again, with something like judo, where the origins of it were, Dr. Kano was a very sickly, was small person. Was clearly he wasn't your prototypical athlete, and so much of judo is designed for smaller people.
Mhm.
And so in that sense, yeah, learning the techniques is very difficult without having guidance behind what you're doing. It's just the discipline of it and the nature of how hierarchical it is, where we have these belt structures and things, makes it difficult too. And part of that isn't just about asserting power over students. It is also about, you need that structure in order to maintain the discipline of doing it. Yeah, I mean, this stuff isn't easy. It's not necessarily, you can just automatically pick it up. Clearly, some people pick it up faster than others, but it still takes a lot of discipline, and it's hard just having people individually just have that kind of focus, get that discipline. You need both a sensei, but you also need other people to train with and have that structure that can kind of support you.
Can you get it online? Like nowadays, again, there's so many teachers. You just go on YouTube, judo, and there's hundreds of channels, and there are professionals who basically tell you everything and how to make throws, how to make various movements. And yeah, if you have an access to, like, if you have a group of people who want to practice judo, let's suppose, like, some 5, 10 people, do you need a teacher to learn, or you may start like studying basics just by simply watching videos and trying to implement the knowledge which you get from there?
Yeah, I think, yeah, there we have access to a lot of information, but I think, again, because of the nature of what we're doing is ultimately really, it's both, it's ultimately physical and it's intimate. It's very, very hard to learn just by watching videos or reading books about how to do judo. And this applies to pretty much all the martial arts, because it's, especially when you watch a video, you get a very limited context about what is actually happening.
Yeah, but then
there.
you may practice it. I mean, it's not just watching videos, but you watch video, and then there's few guys with whom you are practicing judo, and you basically try to do something, see how it works. I mean, the point is like the teacher. So
Sure, yeah, you can, but I would ultimately say it's more of a supplement than it is doing it. And we have this problem a lot where you get students who come in, oh, I saw this YouTube video, I want to try this, and then they will, why doesn't this work? Because again, the video is an incredibly limited view of what you're seeing, and by nature, it's just the viewpoint of wherever the camera is angled at. It's also there's so many subtleties. The idea behind martial arts is haptic. It's about the touch. Or there's another term that I like a lot called hermeneutic, which is understanding through interpretation. And what that means is that to kind of learn it, you actually have to physically do it. And without having somebody there with you who can kind of guide you through it, yeah, I can see something on a video and say, okay, great, I'm going to go and try this. And I might luck into how it's done, but there's so much context that is being missed about it. The one thing I would definitely say for beginners, don't even watch YouTube. Honestly, you're not, it's not going to help you, and it'll make you work. Oh, it'll just make people more frustrated because they'll see these, oh, wow, look at this amazing technique. But yeah, I can't do it. It doesn't work at all. To be honest, if you're at a higher level where you have more of a context and understanding, and most importantly, more control of your body, yeah, then you can use it as a supplement, but it's still, you cannot rely upon that solely as your teacher. You need the direct experience of doing it. There's another part too about the role of sensei, is that as sensei and as someone who's is a sensei to qualify, even though I'm not running a school myself at the moment, is that there's a relationship that's developed about this, and a lot of what you're doing is really just kind of fostering that relationship. And I think again, the show Cobra Kai, I think, is actually very good about how it does that, about the relationship between the students and their senseis. And it kind of traces this arc from, with the two main characters and their senseis, and kind of how that experience shaped their lives, and now how they're shaping the lives of their students. And that's true. There is something very, very powerful about that. And I know for me, the senseis that I have had have made a very big impression on my life. And I've heard from former students and who said, yes, I've made an impression upon their lives, and not just in martial arts, but that's kind of part of it, because a lot of what we do when we're coaching, I'm not just telling them, okay, well, you got to pull here, you got to step here. There's more to it. I'm telling them, okay, well, this is the right, mental attitude you need to pursue. Or this is, when someone's doing badly, when someone's doing poorly is, how do I, talk to them, explain to them, yeah, I understand this is frustrating. I can tell them, well, you need to pull, you need to do this, you need to do this and this physically, but it's also about how do you develop this understanding? How do you, develop your mental character? So that you're never going to get that just by watching videos.
Mhm. Do you have a set of principles and the techniques which you teach, or it's like individual approach to every person?
It's difficult. I mean, I do have a certain set that I would say are kind of what I do, but it's and different again. Different senseis have different ways of approaching this. There are some senseis who are very much quote system, and they have a system, and everybody, if you come, you're going to do this system, and
Mhm.
you got to work within the system. There are some senseis who are much more flexible about it. I tend to have, there's certain things I definitely emphasize I want to teach, but for what the way my body works and such, I tell my students this, there's a lot of what I do that you cannot do simply because your body's just not built like mine.
Mhm.
And there's stuff that, like, if I'm, I'm a relatively short, guy, my judo relies upon speed, relies upon balance, and a lot of kind of counters. Whereas someone who's taller, who's stronger, will rely upon different things. They might not have the speed, but they can certainly do different things than I can do. And there you have to kind of find out, okay, how do I work with what your body can do, and how do we find a way to make that work for you, or somebody who's weaker than me, how do we make that work for you? So
Mhm.
and it's, again, teaching both men and women too, finding out what works for women doesn't always work the same for men.
Uh, do you think that everybody can like learn judo, or there's some restrictions, some limits, and some people basically, I know, mentally or psychologically, they it doesn't work for them. Like, yeah.
Yes, for judo, there certainly are. I don't think everybody can do judo. I do believe everybody can do martial arts of some form, even if, beyond being a paraplegic, I guess you can, there's certainly things you can do. I know part of when I was teaching at the university, I was sort of bound by a university non-discrimination class. So part of what I had to do was try to be able to teach the broadest group of people who could do it. So that required a lot of trying to find out what could work.
Mhm.
But it's the nature of judo is so, again, because it's so physical and so intimate in terms of where you're grabbing people, you're pinning people, you're choking people. Some people, one, just might not have the physical ability to do that at all. A lot of people just are not comfortable with it. They just don't feel comfortable with being that close, with that, that in close fighting. And it's, if they can't overcome that, they can't do it. That's simple. But there's so many martial arts out there. I tend to believe you could probably find something that can work for you. Now,
Mhm.
does that mean everybody can become a good competitor? No, that's certainly not true. But I think everybody could do martial arts, and I'll go further. I think everyone should do martial arts.
What is the peak of performance in terms of age? Like, is it?
Um,
Uh,
Generally with judo, you find that it's basically a race between developing the techniques and your skill versus before your body degrades.
mhm.
It does take a toll on your body, and that's one. And I can tell you this: there's a good saying and I don't think it's just judo, but it's, you hear judo, but it's probably in martial arts, is that the day that there's not something hurting is the day you're dead. And
Mhm.
I for me, every day pretty much there's something hurting in my body. There's just something, and that's just from doing, martial arts for so it's physical. It just takes a toll on you, but it tends to be, I think, kind of late 20s, early 30s kind of tend to be the peak, where you
Mhm.
see, you know, or like mid, or maybe like mid to late 20s or so, some early 30s tends to be the peak. And that's when I think when people are still developing, because you're still developing physically really up until you're like 25. And even then you can still add on physical strength and everything. But once you start getting into your 30s or so, some of the stamina starts going and some of the flexibility certainly starts going. And that makes it harder to do it. And if you can, good judo players tend to be ones who are, very good athletes, but also tend to be very smart. They can develop and learn techniques, and they manage to avoid getting major injuries. And if you can do all that, yeah, if you look at the people in the Olympics, they're ranging in age. We got a few, teenagers, but that's usually it's mostly people mid to late 20s is what you're seeing who are Olympic champions, into their early 30s.
The last time you said that for you, judo is kind of compulsive obsessive disorder. So how much training do you need on a weekly basis? Like how many times a week you have to train, and how it depends on age. Like in your 20s, in your 30s, you may just tell about your experience.
Yeah, it certainly depends. Again, it depends really. You got to decide what your goal is. When I talk about for me psychologically, yeah, it is there's an addictive aspect to it. To both. I mean, I don't feel, it was tough very hard during the pandemic, not doing judo, but and I'll admit this has been a problem for me. And one reason why there's a toll taken on my body, especially when I was younger, is that I would keep on training even though I was injured, because that was just it wasn't even what I wanted to do necessarily. It's just what I felt I was compelled to do. And so this is, again, you have to look at your goals. If you're going to be an Olympic athlete, you got to train every day.
Is it possible? Is it possible, by the way, to like have daily training? I mean, how about your physical?
You can't be doing the same thing every day. You can't be going out there sparring every single day. That's for sure. Even if you're, in your, peak physical condition, you're just risking too much chance of injury. But there's, when I was seriously competing, I would be, training, every day. And I would be, doing, technique drills, I would be doing, doing sparring also, but then I'd also be doing a lot of stuff to condition and things like that. So be doing like weights, like running, stuff like that. And yeah, partly because one, I wanted to be a really good competitor. And unfortunately, to be blunt, I never quite made it to those top tiers, but it's a highly competitive sport and that tends to happen. But at the minimum, if I was going to have any hope of that, yeah, I would be training that much. But a lot of it also was just due to that I felt compelled to do it. It wasn't necessarily that, it was more than just thinking about the goal, because, realistically, even when I was, let's say 28 or 9 was, yeah, I probably, almost no chance of like making it to the Olympics or the World Championship, other than being a spectator, I guess. But to actually go and be a competitor, especially for, a country like the US, would be very difficult. Maybe if I wanted to move to a smaller country. But yeah, that's just, it's competitive. But to do it, you need a certain, I mean, to be able to do this, you even just as like a hobbyist, you need a certain amount of physical ability. You can't go and do it out of shape. If you're out of shape, you'll get yourself injured very quickly. So you need to have a minimum, of good physical stamina. You need to have a minimum strength, good agility, to handle it. And that's pretty much it. You can't be someone who, spends all your time just sitting on the couch, not doing anything else physically. Yeah.
How much do you train now? Like, is it?
I train now about kind of depends, about 2 to 3 times a week, kind of depending upon schedule. I don't train nearly as hard as I did before. Most of the time, a lot of times, like I said, I'm not running a school myself at the moment. So I'm training with a couple of different schools, but a lot of times I'm there, helping them teach. I'm helping, show techniques and, basically helping some of the younger students come along.
Mhm. But
And that.
it's
So
not like
I'm not.
just
I'm,
to keep shape, or it's still it's
it's
there's some drive which like you want to like get in fight or.
Oh, there is still that drive. Believe me, I
Mhm.
still, and yesterday morning I was at, and that was, they decided that day they're going to have a lot of sparring. So I did actually spar, quite a bit. And yeah, and I enjoy it. I mean, it's still something that, I like to do. And I'll say that is almost a compulsion in some sense of doing that, even though I know, yeah, I can't, if I do too much of it, yeah, I'll certainly take a toll on my body because I've already got injured areas that will probably never heal. But there is that compulsion to do it. I mean, the other part is why I go out and, I feel because I've done judo for so long, I've got the title of sensei, and part of that doesn't mean that, I'm this badass who can go out and beat everybody, but it also means I've got a duty to the kind of community of judo to help teach and help share my knowledge. And I certainly enjoy sharing my knowledge. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things when you get to a certain point where, well, I might not be able to bring it all the time in terms of going out there and, fighting nonstop and, beating everybody on the floor, but I have a lot to offer in terms of what I know and my experiences.
Have you thought about writing a book and combining some philosophy and judo in one?
Um, I thought about it, not really. I think there are other books out there. There are people who are both better judoka or philosophers than me, I think, who have
Yeah,
written
but not
books.
like writing a book not to publish it or to sell it, but like for yourself, basically to put all your experience in some kind of I mean, a book can survive much longer than the physical body, right? So, and when you try to focus on like when you try to analyze your experience by writing a book, it makes you understand much better what you was doing, and yeah, it may be very useful. I mean, just as an
Sure,
experience.
yeah, you're just saying, just kind of getting a record of my thoughts. I have not really thought about it, but no,
Mhm.
that does sound like something that's interesting. Unfortunately, my life and schedule, especially now, are very, pretty tight. I think I'd have a hard time just finding the time to. That's another discipline of trying writing. Is a real discipline too, and
Yeah, it's like
I just
like for philosophy.
might commit to the discipline.
It's a part
Yeah.
of philosophy, right? So okay,
Yes, right. Yeah, that's true. Bob philosophers, you have to write, should
yeah.
write something. I've
So
not.
to find an hour a day or 30 minutes a day and consider
Right.
this like another training, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I just think I don't quite have that discipline
Mhm.
yet to do it. I mean, I've got the I've got the discipline. I will admit, every morning I get up and I exercise, about 20 minutes or so. But no, that's another. So I think sitting down trying to write a book for hour or so, that might actually be harder.
Well,
Trying to
you
find.
may start from like just 20 minutes,
Right. Right.
30 minutes, an hour, few hours, 5 hours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. It's
like for me, it works very well when I'm overwhelmed with like physical training. I just
mhm.
try to focus on some intelligent pursuits and writing, reading, watching some lectures, listening to some people, talking to people. And then when I'm exhausted on an intellectual level, I try to shift my attention to like physical activity, running, and also exercises, doing
Right.
some physical work.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah. That's
for me, it's still hard to find balance. So
mhm.
when I like to be focused on one thing. So if I'm like if I'm trying to read a book, I'm trying to like be completely there and without
Right.
being just distracted. And often I find myself in situations when I just I want to do both. I want to do physical work. I want to do reading, and when I'm reading, I'm thinking about doing exercises, and when I'm doing exercises, I'm thinking about something that I've read before, and create some kind of disturbances inside. But yeah, I'm still trying to manage it, to do something.
Sure, right. And finding that balance and everything is particularly difficult. I mean, it's hard to find it, but I'll say again, one of the appeals of martial arts and probably why I do it is that when you talk about the immediacy and the focus and being in the moment, like I said, you have to mentally control the moment, otherwise you'll just be completely overwhelmed by it. But again, if we talk about martial arts and philosophy, this idea of what we do is utilitarian, it's pragmatic, because there's a result that has to be met there, and that is if I'm doing a match, well, I'm trying to win the match, and the means of doing it kind of enforce themselves upon that. So one of the things that and one reason why you hear Zen tied a lot to martial arts is because the philosophy of Zen, of the being the immediate in the moment, has a lot of appeal in terms of martial arts, because you have to be immediate in the moment for something like, again, like judo, where if you're not, the results are, you get beaten, but you're beaten because you're thrown on your back, you're choked, or you're pinned, or you could get your arm broken. I mean, those kind of make you have to be there, have awareness about what's going on, do it. And so one of my early senseis was studying to be a Zen monk, and this is something that's always stuck to me quite a bit about it, is that when you learn to do martial arts, the ultimate goal here is what he would talk about appropriateness to the moment, is that you're so in tune with the moment that in some sense you've trained so much, you've thought so much about it, that your actions become thoughtless, in terms of that they act almost automatically. And by appropriate to the moment, he would talk about, well, if you're so in tune with the moment, what is the appropriate action to the moment is you throw the guy. And you do that not because you're willing yourself to do that. You do that because that is the moment. And Bruce Lee talked about this, one of his, where he talked about, your fist doesn't hit, it hits all by itself. And it's a very strange concept, but it's a concept that applies to a lot, not just martial arts. You hear it used a lot in sports, such as in baseball. What baseball is, maybe not as familiar with it, but I understand what a famous batter once said: "See ball, hit ball." It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's what he broke it down to, was that this is the action that is appropriate to the moment. I see the ball, I hit the ball.
Yeah, I understand how to reach this state in a short period of time. You may maintain it for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but do you think it's possible to reach this state that you are forever in it? And for example, you're always in the moment. You don't think about being somewhere else. You're always like in whatever you're doing, you are here. It's not just martial arts. It's every time you're aware of what's going on. And
that's the goal of Zen, is to try to get to that state, is to be always in that Zen state. And it's very difficult. Zen reaches through it by meditation, by by mindfulness. So all your actions, whether you're walking, whether you're breathing, whether you're washing the dishes,
you're
all mindful.
It's like always. I try to focus on my breath, but not just in the meditation, but basically like how long can I keep this awareness of breathing? Like, is it half an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? And it's very interesting experiment. Like when you just try, okay, 2 hours, yeah. At some moment you just forget about it. There's no way to maintain it for a couple of hours if you do not just focus on it and do only it. As soon as you distract it a little bit, as soon as you have to like go somewhere or have to talk to somebody, it just instantly disappears. And then it gets back, and just keeping awareness on one aspect of your life. Like again, it may be breathing, but it may be also like, okay, what am I doing? I'm practicing martial arts, and you try to keep in mind like this awareness every day, that okay, I am a practitioner, I do certain certain activity, and then you bring more and more into it. Like first it may be okay, I'm doing certain activity, but then you start thinking about yourself as a martial artist. About it's like you kind of you put your identity here, and
Right.
yeah, and as you said at the beginning, like kung fu, like you try to master everything. But what is mastery? Basically, uh, in every action, you are trying to be present in
Mhm.
each action, and of course, when you do that, you basically learn to do it better and better, inevitably, like every action.
Well, yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, it's not easy. And again, the martial arts helps because there's the immediacy of the of the actions. The physical actions have a very immediate result. So if you lose your focus,
Yeah,
the end result is you lose a match or worse. Yeah.
you get thrown or you're pinned, and
Right. So it kind of demands your attention, basically your attention there.
yeah,
So how
yeah,
yeah, how do you do that in other times when you don't have that immediacy? That's very hard to do. And I don't have any good answers to it other than what I've heard from other people, people who've done Zen and tried it, and it's very hard to do.
yeah, you shouldn't do anything. That's the point. So when you can sit
Right.
the entire day and do nothing, yeah, it may work. But as soon as you are engaged in some social interactions and in various things in work, and dealing with family, with friends, with the internet, like going online and reading some posts on Facebook, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
almost impossible. But again, like this ideal of reaching this state, I
Mhm.
guess it's always going to be a kind of very not beautiful, but
Right.
so
Yeah. Yeah. But it's again, it's a difficult. If you look at again the site, a lot of kind of not just Zen has kind of described it and put it front and center, but most kind of warrior ethos and things like that do talk about that idea about how totally consuming this idea of being in battle is. And even modern times, you hear one of the kind of why many soldiers have a hard time adjusting, leaving the war zone or suffering PTSD is because of how completely consuming, when you're in a war zone, how complete consuming that is. You have to, again, your life depends upon your complete awareness of what's going on. And without that, they find it very hard to kind of adapt to saying, okay, well, it becomes very problematic because if I'm not in a war zone and I'm still trying to act with complete awareness, or else I feel like, well, this doesn't like this life doesn't demand complete awareness of me. You can either
yeah, you may
want
relax, yeah.
right, yeah, you either become too stressed because you're over stressed about situations that don't apply, or else you lose. I've heard people been you lose that stimulation too. There's no sense of real. Everything just becomes too flat. I mean, it's because I don't have that. I mean, and obviously, it's not what we do in martial arts and in sport. We're not at war, but there is that same sense of when you're fighting, there's that sense of immediacy, and without that sense of immediacy, yeah, I that was one of the letdowns during the pandemic was I couldn't do it for months. Was well, it did feel like there was something missing in my life because I wasn't getting that kind of sense of kind of that immediacy about it. So
Mhm. But you still can develop some kind of warrior mentality, even if you're not at war. You still may, they call it like kind of warrior.
sure,
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is one of the things with the warrior mentality about, and I think the warrior mentality has a lot to do with again this idea about being able to apply yourself to something, apply yourself to a task, to be, develop that sense of focus and that sense of drive about doing things. So you can certainly apply the warrior mentality to many other things besides doing martial arts or being in battle. But again, the stresses of those situations makes it easier to develop a warrior mentality. I mean, you have to have a warrior mentality to survive. This is, again, true of all war. It's very true of the Spartans, why they trained their people in a certain way, why they immersed their people in the agoge, which was incredibly brutal training. But it's again, I'm a proponent of kind of the warrior mentality and how it applies to other things, but it is something that has to be used carefully. It's something that can be dangerous. It was like going back to what we were earlier talking about. If you think about the agoge, the Spartan agoge, it was incredibly brutal. And it was basically designed to create bullies. That was pretty much what it was. In the end, the products of the agoges were ones who, survived by strength and stamina and cunning. And they were meant to brutalize, the people, the weaker members of the agoge. And they were meant to brutalize other people too. So it's a difficult thing to deal with, but there's good and the bad of it.
It's necessary for survival. It's not just one person, but the entire community.
Right. Yes. And that was kind of the idea again behind judo, why there's mutual benefit welfare, is that it's what we do again is, there's no sugarcoating about it. It's brutal from an outside observer too. When you see a judo match, if you've never seen what's going on, or you see a boxing match. And it's that part is, you are trying to defeat another human being. You're trying to inflict pain upon another human being. You're trying to dominate another human being. That's not something that's nice, but it's how do you, it's when you put it into a broader context about how do you understand it. Again, like I've said, even though I'm trying to defeat this person, I still respect them. Either they're bringing out my technique or they're pointing out weaknesses in my technique.
Is there some statistics of the popularity of different schools in America or in the world? I mean,
yeah, certainly. Judo is actually very popular. Well, it's practiced quite a bit. That's why it's an Olympic sport. Ironically, though, the U.S. is not as popular as some of the other martial arts. But judo is, I'm sure in Russia, judo is very popular in Russia and many of the European countries and the Middle Eastern, obviously the Asian countries, and America. In the U.S., it's hard to say what is the most. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has gotten very popular in recent decades. And as someone who does some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu too, it's appeal to it. I'm not quite sure why it got more popular than judo. I've nothing against it, and I don't mind doing it. Taekwondo has been very successful worldwide. That's why it's also an Olympic sport. Karate was just in this past Olympics, has been pretty good popularity. So I'd say those are probably your most popular sport, your sports martial arts, I would say. But there's a lot of people who do Tai Chi. Tai Chi has become very widely not popular in many countries. And there's other, Aikido is not quite nearly as popular, but there's Aikido is out there. I'm trying to think of some of the other, obviously very Kung Fu Wushu schools. There's a lot of them. Wing Chun, a particular style of Kung Fu, has been very popular because of Bruce Lee, and was a Wing Chun practitioner.
Yeah.
Originally, though, he came up with his own style called Jeet Kune Do.
I've recently watched Ip Man 4. Ip Man, have you watched this movies? Like Ip Man?
Oh,
1?
yeah. I watched the whole series. Yeah. Like it,
you mentioned before this series, Karate Kai.
Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai, yeah, Cobra Kai. When there's two schools basically, and they compete, and there are some serious problems in the city. Have you seen something like that in the real world where like?
Oh yes, it,
Mhm,
it's it, it's there's unfortunately with like everything else, martial arts gets very political,
mhm.
and I think just by nature humans are political animals. So there's always tensions and rivalries and such between schools. I mean that's definitely happened. That's definitely true. I mean, and if you see Ip Man, I mean Ip Man talks about this where you see the different, in the early Mens for the different, Hong Kong schools or the
Yeah,
different
yeah.
Foshan, which don't want to accept him, and then MM4 he's in America and how he has to deal with the Americans, and they're apparently want to do karate, whereas he's doing Chinese. It's called Chinese boxing, which is Wing Chun, is what he's doing. So there's that. That part is yes, the kind of rivalries between schools definitely happens, and certainly that part's true. And I like how Cobra Kai handles that, where there's a personal rivalry between two senseis, which stuff like that does happen. Obviously this is a TV show, so it's kind of dramatized, a lot more, but there's
Mhm.
certainly that tension between it and the relationship between the senseis and the students. And again, yeah, it's played up, it's much more dramatized, and the martial arts, they seem to become very good very quickly, is just playing for show, but definitely that's true. And senseis can make a very, can make a very big difference, especially with young students' lives and how they, perceive things and how they look at the world. So,
Mhm.
that rings very true to me.
What do you think about the influence on uh, people by popular culture, like by movies and well, I don't think there are lots of books. There are, but usually
Sure.
young people don't like to read books about anything, not just martial art. But movies, yeah. I remember my experience. There was lots of movies with Jean-Claude Van Damme,
Oh yeah,
Stallone, and
yeah.
I like to watch them, but I I wouldn't say that it had any impact on me. I mean, I didn't want to practice any martial arts just by watching movies. But later when I started doing wushu, I remember watching Bruce Lee movies. I didn't watch them when I was in my teens. I watched them only like in my 20s, and it had a strong impact. But mostly
Mhm.
books. Yeah, I remember just starting reading books. It helped a lot.
Well, certainly, yeah. And the Bruce Lee's book, Jeet Kune Do, is a very good martial arts book. It's very, the problem with a lot of martial arts books is the movie, again, because there's a narrative and a plot. Most martial arts books aren't, they tend to become very dry, kind of technical manuals almost. But there there are, I mean, the thing about it, a lot of people want to get into martial arts because they see movies and they say, oh wow, yeah, that
Mhm.
looks really cool. Most of what you see in movies is very impractical.
Hmm.
It's not realistic. I mean, Bruce Lee himself talked about what you see him do in movies is really not what he would actually do. In fact, in Jeet Kune Do and some of his other writings, he kind of argues against what you see, like the big high kicks, a lot of the big, very fun moves. But that's what looks.
Yeah,
If you almost think
it makes
about,
an impression, right, and attracts
right,
people.
exactly, when they talk about movie fighting, they talk about choreography. So it is a dance, and so you're appreciating the kind of physical, flair and the flash of things like that. Whereas that's not. I mean, one of the biggest areas is like sword fighting. I've done a little sword fighting. I've done some kendo, which is Japanese. And yeah, if you watch like Star Wars and how they're fighting with lightsabers and or any some of these other samurai movies, yeah, you would get killed. You would not survive because you're making these very big flamboyant moves that
Mhm.
aren't really practical. And the same thing, you watch like like a lot of martial arts actual matches don't look, unless you know the art, unless you understand it, do not look very entertaining from the outside eye. I mean, it's even like MMA fights. you see like two guys spend a lot. In fact, MMA changed its rules to kind of make it a little more widespread appeal, and that's why it's really taken off, like UFC. But if you see like two guys down on the ground in the guard, and they look like they're just kind of hugging each other, and you're sitting there watching that for like a minute. No, I don't know what's going on. It's hard to understand that. From doing it, yeah, you start under, oh, okay, I see what he's doing. He's trying to set up this technique. And UFC actually changed their rules to kind of make it more, quote, stand up. So there's more boxing, more kicking. And that's kind of what really started really getting UFC to be very, very popular, is because if you weren't like someone who was dedicated martial arts, you would actually start getting more of an understanding of what's going on. And it looks more appealing than some of the early days when it was just you'd see two guys to kind of lock up and then they're just on the ground for several minutes. You don't really know what's going on. So
Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the martial arts of philosophy. So
the
not
martial arts of
philosophy, not philosophy of martial arts, but do you see something like when you read certain philosophical works, there are lots of attacks from various various philosophers, and mostly they attack the like dead philosophers. Most of the time they didn't fight with each other, but somebody like Nietzsche, for example, takes Socrates, Plato, various religious, and tries to sometimes really attack them. He even uses this military language.
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, like it's not a question, but yeah, I want to understand how much of like in philosophy, how much it is similar to what's going on in martial arts.
There is certainly. I mean, there's the idea of debate, of rhetoric, is, yes, it's a conflict, and you're trying to win by this. It's kind of the same way where you're trying to win an argument by the superiority of your skill in presenting the argument, the structure of your argument. And that's certainly, it's harder, I find, kind of disagreements in philosophy, because then you start getting into disagreements that can't be reconciled in some ways. And it almost becomes a popularity contest to say, like, if we're arguing rationalism versus empiricism or something. But if we're having a specific philosophical debate, yeah, you might want to try to structure. So again, some of the ideas of, how do you become a good martial artist would maybe apply to how you become a good debater. Is you have to train, you have to build up your knowledge base, you have to study, you have to learn to, understand how do you construct an argument and things like that. I mean, that can certainly take on that. It's hard, because I'm not sure Nietzsche was necessarily having a debate with some of these people. I think he might have just been more just attacking other people because he believed other people were foolish and were wrong. But if you look at more, I'm trying to think of some great debate, and there where you can argue, where you both kind of have, again, you have basically a set of rules and a context of what you're arguing. I think there you can kind of say that can be more martial arts like. But I think it's hard to just kind of come out with very broad philosophical statements, such as like just arguing, saying the soul exists or the soul doesn't exist. We could certainly have a debate in that, but argue what are the terms? How do you determine who wins the debate, whether you have a soul or not? It gets a little trickier. But in terms of certain arguments, like legal arguments is one where I would say actually far more close to martial arts, because there you are trying to craft, you have a set of rules that you're operating under. There's a context that you're operating under, and there is a winner and a loser.
Yeah, but it sounds more like, it's not like philosophy, but some kind of rhetoric. right, in debates. And
Right.
in philosophy, you may also take some, like, you use your books, like, your book, it's the whole, it's like one punch or one strike, and you use your book to attack, for example, a certain school of thought or certain other philosophers, and see how you can do that. For example, you may take, let's suppose you don't like, you think that a certain ideology, uh we might take Jordan Peterson as an example, right? So
Right. Yes.
he doesn't like postmodernism, and he
No,
tries
he
to,
doesn't.
yeah, and he tries to attack it using certain skills, certain arguments, and from this perspective, he basically like a fighter, right?
Right.
And his lectures, his books, they are structured, not mostly, but they're structured in a way that the entire content which he creates may be considered as an attack at a particular school, and it's very close to like this
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
this mindset, like in philosophy, you basically, oh, okay, this is something that yeah, the question is, what are you fighting against? How well you understand it? Like, I don't
Well,
think that.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's an intellectual conflict in that sense. And I guess in terms of, if you look at, again, this idea that, martial arts and is about mediating conflict, or about how do you understand conflict, or how do you succeed in conflict? Yes. And there you can say the same principles apply again of training yourself. You have to be able to train, you have to be able to you know what your argument is, know what the other person's argument is. I mean, you can say the Sun Tzu adage applies very well there. Yeah, you know yourself and your enemy. You need not fear the result of 1,000 battles. So at that point, yeah, let's say if Jordan Peterson's, having a discussion, well, I'm going to presume Jordan Peterson knows his argument, and presuming he's knowledgeable about what the counter argument is. So then you'd have to put forward, how do I give a convincing argument? I mean, the ultimate goal here is, in philosophy, we can say maybe it's the rhetoric idea is the ultimate goal, is how do I convince more people that,
Mhm.
this, my view is superior towards others, because I'm sure in my mind, maybe I'm absolutely convinced my view is more superior. But this is this is where we get into some difficulties about saying, well, this is all conflict. It is all. It's a little bit different, mainly because in terms of martial arts, sports martial arts, is that yes, we have rules and we have winners and losers. There's always this thing about what are, you know, no, questions your assumptions. What do you start with in a philosophical debate? What is the axioms there? And it's hard if you don't agree upon the basic axioms there.
You don't go
And
anywhere.
yeah, that right, yeah, we might not go anywhere. If we stay in martial arts, we have basic set ground rules about that. Or you can say, if we're looking at a fight, like a battle, well, the axioms are there, is that we're human beings opposing each other and we're trying to kill the other human being. So that is proof of it. It's when you're saying, again, our philosophical arguments is what is the goal? Are we trying to convince them we're right? Are we trying to win over other people? I think you can take some of the ideas of martial arts to that, to how you prepare yourself for that, and how your focused is on that argument.
Yeah, but
But it starts falling a little apart when you get what is the end results of what you're trying to get to.
yeah, we may consider it as, for example, in martial arts schools, there's basically, if you belong to a certain school, you want to spread this school across the world, and you want everybody to
Sure.
practice this martial art. And the same may be in philosophy. You may identify yourself as a part of certain school, which is closer to you than all others, and then you may first protect it from other, from arguments of other schools, or you may attack like as soon as you feel strong enough, you may try to attack other schools which you don't like.
Right. Yes, and this has always been part of philosophy. Going back to obviously Socrates and the Sophist, where
Yeah.
arguing with each other, and they were Socrates was mocking them, and so or I guess Plato and his follow. Yeah, that certainly can, and again, the ideas of martial arts, the approach of martial arts, I guess, would apply there. And so, how do you do this if you don't have, if you're not in shape, if you're don't have a certain level of physical ability? Just like it'd be hard to have, a meaningful philosophical, debate if you just don't have the knowledge base to it. I mean, you're just not don't know, you need to be educated. You need to understand, how basic logic works and things like that to be able to have a meaningful philosophical debate.
Yeah, it's both. Like it's content and the form which you present this content. And in martial
Right.
arts, I guess it's like content is your experience, and like how you present it is basically depends on your skills. And by
Sure.
experience,
Right.
I mean the amount of time which you dedicate to studying a particular discipline.
I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah. I have one more question about enemies, and I guess now it's over like 20 minutes past midnight in Russia.
Okay.
Uh,
Sure. Wait, please don't. Yeah. Don't let me keep you up too late. But no, I'm
yeah,
certainly. I'm more than happy to talk about this. This is a
that's okay.
discussion.
That's okay. The role of enemies in both in philosophy and martial arts, does they make you stronger, and what kind of enemies do you have to how should you treat them, and is it really how important it is to have an enemy?
I actually think it is somewhat important too. I mean, like I said, when you're in a match and you lose, you thank your opponent for showing the weakness in your technique, or if you win, you thank him for bringing the best out of you. I think that's and yeah, I don't like necessarily saying my opponent is my enemy, but they are opposed to me, so that would make them an enemy. It's yeah.
Well,
There's
it's an opponent. It's competition, but
right.
like
Yes.
real enemy, like some person who really whatever tries to do some harm to you, or you try to do some harm to these people.
Well, again, and part of again the martial arts that I do is we try to get beyond that view that
So there's no enemies.
are that
Uh,
they're enemies. They are people who oppose us. We want to beat them.
mhm.
That said, it's now we can say we have rivalries maybe, but that's hard because and again I don't want to say the end all be all, because if you look at what is martial arts, again look at what the Spartans were doing. They clearly had enemies. They believe them enemies they wanted to fight. I mean there is a sense that having just an implacable foe, that someone who does really want to, can make you better, because that again that's a compulsion that forces you to have to be better, because otherwise if you don't they will destroy you. And that's I think there's definitely something to that can bring out the best in you. It's again a problem is how much the problem is when you're wrapped up in that this enemy is going to get me, it starts becoming consuming
Mhm.
in your life, and that can certainly be a problem. And there's plenty of stories of actually of athletes who have been beaten and have a rivalry where they become very consumed by the idea where there is an enemy and I want to beat this person. I mean, there's stories of like athletes like hanging the picture of
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever their particular opponent in their locker, so every time they see and they tell them, okay, I got to beat this guy, I got to beat this guy.
Mhm.
But if you think about in philosophical schools, there's people Again, kind of rivalry is the continental versus the British or English kind of view,
Yeah,
like rationalism versus
analytical
empiricism.
philosophy. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And you could argue that was, there was very, obviously disagreements and rivalries, but in some ways, I think that did kind of help advance philosophy. And it did kind of advance knowledge base of them because of that difference. No.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not
Here you
sure they
go.
were complete enemies per se, but there definitely was rivalry and they definitely considered themselves in opposition.
I've read lots of Castaneda. There was a concept, it was called petty tyrant. And it was one of the necessary concepts. So if you don't have a petty tyrant, you have to, uh, you have to go and search for it, because
Right. You
otherwise,
have to invent one.
yeah, otherwise
Yes.
you can get wise. So if there's nothing that push it, just that will not make you kind of feel alert, feel
Mhm.
you won't be able to get to a certain level unless you have somebody who always like, makes you conscious, makes you aware of, you know.
Right. Yeah, and certainly within martial arts and sports, there is this concept that and it certainly goes where people say, well, you have to hate your opponents. You really have to hate them. You
Mhm.
really want to, because that will completely focus you to the point of saying that this will bring the and let go back again to Sun Tzu. So talking about martial arts philosophy, he had this concept of what's called death's ground. And basically his idea was that if you put your soldiers in a position where retreat is impossible, where essentially there is no, it's either complete annihilation or victory, they will fight that much harder. And this is a
It's like,
concept that's been used to motivate soldiers quite a bit throughout history, where you have to paint your enemy completely as these people are totally merciless. They are essentially, they're not human. And so you have to fight, otherwise it will be the complete eradication of you, your country, everybody you love. And that's the idea of death's ground. And so the idea is, if you can get, it wasn't so much about just hating them, it's just the understanding that it's either you win or you're annihilated.
yeah, there's no way back. It's kind of burning the boats in Greece mythology, right? They
Right.
got there, they burned the boat. Either we win or we are going to die. But
Right. Yes.
yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of,
And yeah, there's a history, there's a story from this actually from the Battle of Stalingrad.
mhm.
So to talk about
Yeah,
Russia
yeah,
is
it's like no way back, I guess.
right,
Right.
is that they put the Russian soldiers into combat, in some cases without rifles, but with the understanding that this is it. If we lose Stalingrad, we cannot retreat from Stalingrad.
Yeah, we don't have a song. Yeah, I guess it's "Ni шагу назад," no step back.
Right.
Um, and also in terms of enemies, it shouldn't be exactly a person. So it may be something, some kind of entity. So you may take your fear as enemy. You may take
Right.
any aspect of your personality which you don't like, and try to fight against this. And in philosophy, it's yeah, I guess it works really well. And then you project this. First, you uh, defeat it in yourself, and then you start looking around and see like how can you defeat it, not like in the world or manifestation of it in the world. If it's some silliness or stupidity, you uh, try to do something first with your stupidity, but then you see how you can deal with stupidity in general.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly that concept. And this is one thing I like to draw upon another philosophical cultural tradition is the idea of jihad, which is
Mhm.
loosely translated. People used to refer to it as holy war. but it doesn't actually mean that. My understanding is, and I'm not a Muslim, so I can't say for certain, but what I'm reading is that it just means it means a focus, like struggle basically. And I've read other Muslim philosophers, Islamic scholars say what it means is jihad. Yes, we hear it just in the concept of, because terrorists, you're using it to fight against the West, but jihad can mean like, if I'm an alcoholic and I want to overcome drinking, I'm going to wage a jihad against my compulsion to drink.
Mhm.
So it's this integral focus struggle against, or like you were saying, if I want to wage, I'm a teacher, I want to wage a jihad against ignorance.
Mhm.
I have to give my all to struggle to, against ignorance. So it's an interesting concept in that point, like you were saying about something that really demands you to overcome it.
What advice would you give to young people who wants to practice martial arts and judo in particular?
Judo, I would say I wouldn't have. I know some people have as young as children as young as 5 doing judo. I would not say no. They need to have some sense of awareness, and probably like 7 or 8 is probably the earliest I would say child should start judo. And the main thing to come in is, first off, find a good school. Find, and that's less for the child to do, but maybe more for the parents to find the school that they feel comfortable with about that. And I would say, schools again that have come off very pushy and very, an idea that, we're going to work people really hard. And, I might be a little careful about that, because that there is still among martial arts many an idea that, I've heard this term before here. We're not here to celebrate success. We're here to punish weakness.
Mhm.
That, so stuff like that you might not want to do. But the main thing is you want to find a school that can be that you feel comfortable with the teaching of it and comfortable with how the sensei runs things. That's kind of the big thing. And the other big thing is, don't get frustrated by it. It can be very frustrating because it's hard. It's hard to do it, and it's easy as a kid or young adult or anybody, doing it to become, or anybody to just say, well, I've been doing judo for a month and I'm not getting any better. It's, I'm having a really hard time, doing this. I don't feel, don't get frustrated. It's difficult. And those are the main things I'd say about it.
Yeah, how much time do you need to like really understand whether it's for you or not? Like half a year, maybe 2 years,
I would say, I'd say
at least
6 months at the minimum.
Mhm.
Probably a year. Yeah, it's again getting. I mean, your early frustration is. Yeah, I this is a story I like to tell about when I started it, and I started at the same time with somebody else who was much larger, much bigger, stronger guy. And so when we started and would spar, he would throw me constantly. He would just, and he was so strong, he would just pick me up off the ground and just kind of, throw me down. It really wasn't technique. It was just, he was just stronger. He was bigger. He was just a big kid. By the time we got, about like 2.5 years in, by the time we got to the green belt level, I was throwing him.
Mhm.
And shortly after that, he quit judo because he just didn't get better. He just got by because he was just a big, strong kid. Whereas I was forced to get better. I was forced to learn technique.
Mhm.
And he found when just strength alone wasn't getting it done, at that point, it wasn't fun for him anymore, and he quit. So.
Okay, so don't get frustrated and find a
Yeah.
good school.
Yeah,
All
but
right.
judo can get very frustrating at times. There, even now, even all my whole, there's plenty of times where I've been very, very frustrated. Yeah.
Okay, so sure. Thank you for conversation.
No, thank you for having me, Vladimir. This has been, no, I as you can tell, I love talking about martial arts. I'm more than happy to talk about it.